So this is a basic budgeting class. So I'm not going to go into all the details on a lot of things. This is going to kind of give you an overview of things you should really be thoughtful of when you're creating your budgets. This also will be specific towards the Creative Core budget. And I've given you a template because there's there's some specific information there as far as the percentage for the artists and percentage for admin. And so I created a spreadsheet for you, which will automatically tell you what that percentage is. So I'm Andrea Mitchell. I live in Oak Hills, also have a place in San Clemente, love the mountains, love the desert, love flowers, and have done a lot of grant writing for a lot of organizations throughout the IE. And I feel honored to work with such groups such as Arts Connection and some others as well. So been around a while, been around the block. There you go. Let's move on. Okay. Before we start, I'd like to find out if you can put in chat, just put the letter A through E, if you, on your knowledge level of experience in budgeting, proposal budgeting, program budgeting. So if you could just throw in the chat, A, B, C, D, or E, if you're oh so comfortable, because I'd like to get a kind of an idea of who is in the group. Okay. Great. Got some A's, C's, B's. Okay, good. Nobody's oh so comfortable yet. And you A's, it's okay. Don't be afraid.
There was a C plus.
There's a C plus.
I like that you guys got the minuses and the pluses.
I do. Good. All right. So we're in the in the lower level of knowledge, and that's okay. By the end, I hope that this increases. So thank you very much for doing that. The other thing I'd like you to put in, just because I don't know who you are, and I'd like to know who you are. So if you could put in the chat, and I'd love to go around and have everybody introduce themselves. But what I'd like to do, though, is get you to feel more comfortable with budgets. That's a priority. So if you could put in the chat your name, your role in the organization, and your organization. That way I can take a look at it later and see who I'm talking to. Okay. And I'm going to go on to the next slide. What we're going to be covering today, believe it or not, you already know a lot about budgets. And we're going to, if you've ever created something, if you've had a project you've worked on, you in your mind, you may not have formalized it, but you already know a lot about budgets. So we're going to review what you already know. Then we're going to get into budgeting for personnel, which is a key part of this. Then and budgeting for operations. And then we're going to get into organizational budgets, because this grant does require an organizational budget, and then putting it all together in a budget that hopefully will help you prepare for the Creative Core application. So we're going to move right along. All right. So first thing is what you already know about budgets. Okay. If you're working on anything, you have identified a need. There's a reason why you're doing this. If you're doing working in schools, working with kids on getting them to appreciate art in schools, you've identified that there's a need for that. So you know that there's a need for something. And from that, you've created something to meet that need. So you've created a program. Now, programs need people to run them, and they need things. So right then and there, so you have a need, you have a program that you're creating, and then you got to staff it, and you need staffing and stuff. But then there's other things you need. You may not need them directly for this program, but you need it for your business or your organization to run. So you need things, indirect things, like you need to keep the electricity going. You need to have water. You need to probably pay some accountant to take care of your stuff. So there are other things that you need. And then you've got to have somebody to kind of oversee the whole project, to see what you're doing, to make sure you're doing it right. Could be you, could be somebody else. And then you want to obviously have some kind of outcomes. All those things come together in a budget. So if you think about it, at any time in your life, if you've ever had a problem, you go through this process, and all of it relates to your budget. So I think about, at one point in time, was a BlackBerry phone fiend. I loved my BlackBerry phone because it had a keyboard. Well, one time I had to go fly to Sacramento and I could not check in on my BlackBerry. And I knew it was time. It was time to move away from BlackBerry. So then I had to assess everything. So I had a need. So then I had to assess it. I had to assess what I needed to do. So I then decided I did not want to drink the Apple Kool-Aid and get an iPhone, even though I use an Apple computer. So I decided to buy a Google Pixel. Well, I had to then go through the budget here. I had to figure out how I had to get the Google Pixel, how I had to then upload things. So there were all these things that I had to go through in my mind, but it all related to the cost of the BlackBerry. So or of replacing the BlackBerry. I still miss my BlackBerry. So if you get to a point where you start getting lost in the process, just go back to a problem that you've solved in your life and think of all the steps it's taken, because all those things relate to budgets. I know it sounds weird, but you'll see at the end. So the first thing we're going to talk about is people, because most programs need people. Oh, actually, sorry. Let me go over all the components of budget. So we just talked about all the things you have to think about. So what goes into a budget are people that do things that you need to run the program, stuff. And then, like I talked about, this indirect, these other expenses that you need to keep the organization going. We're going to talk about all three of those because those are the three big chunks of budgets. All right. So when you're talking about people, budgeting for people, it's really important. This is really hard because especially if you've been working in the nonprofit sector for a long time, and I hate even saying this, but if you as an artist, as a professional, sometimes are undervalued in society, we have a tendency to change ourselves in our salaries. And that's really important to note because funders in the past didn't necessarily understand, but funders understand now your value. And if you come in low on your salaries, on your pay, the funder's actually going to have a problem with it because they're going to think, look, if we pay people at the very low end, if they get $1 more, they're going to jump ship and we're going to lose stability. So it's really important that when you are budgeting, so you want to consider the years of basically experience, education, and determine staffing costs. So just know that if you have tons of experience and you are gifted and you do your job well, you should get paid for it. Also, make sure you cost out similar positions. If there is a position, say you're looking to hire someone, an executive director or an admin assistant, make sure you cost it out in other similar positions in your area. Unfortunately, the IE pays lower than LA. That is just the fact. Things are generally at times less expensive in the IE. But so compare yourself to the IE, but don't compare yourself to Imperial County because we actually pay more than Imperial County. So just make sure you understand where you're going to be hiring people. If at all possible, pay people adequate benefits. If you're bringing on full-time people, they should get benefits, period. So when you're looking at this, these are some off to the head side. These are some websites that I frequently use to find similar pay. Now, you guys are going to be in a little different. I think some of you may be in a little different, a different field in that art, you know better than I do how artists get paid. So just make sure that you are not shortchanging yourself because the funders will see that that's a problem. They would rather have you pay yourself or your artists adequate wages. I'm going to pause. Jennifer, do we have any questions?
I have not seen any come through in the chat, but please make sure if you have questions, please put them in the chat, or right now, if you feel comfortable and like to unmute, you can go ahead and ask any questions you have. And
I agree with your comment. Please pay yourself. Please.
If this came up in a couple of the mixers, what would be a good salary, an hourly rate for an artist you were hiring? I like to say it does depend, but if it's a an hourly rate position. If it's a stipend position, I'm trying to get away from stipends because you always get shortchanged. That a good range for an artist for a short-term project, or even, I pay my teaching artists $75 an hour, and I don't like to pay them anything less because that includes prep time. If you're including prep time, you could break that out a little bit smaller. So just making sure that you're, and really the cost of living out here, you have to, I would say, at least $18 an hour, even though the state minimum wage is 16. So, but
interestingly enough, I just did a Department of Labor grant, and they said that in the IE, what they consider like a sustaining wage out here is $21.34 or something like that an hour. So it's in the 20s.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for as far as an adequate wage at a minimum.
Yeah.
Now, and Nicole asked a good question. Is there a dictionary or similar of words that describe various roles or careers or positions of artists? I think, Jennifer King, you probably know that better than I do.
I think that's not a simple answer. Various roles or careers or positions of artists. I could start brainstorming a bunch of titles and put them in the chat, but let me think about that, because Americans for the Arts has a lot of good resources that might be all in one place without me inundating you with a list in the chat. But while Andrea's doing this, I will do some research and try to find something that's a good resource for you all.
And Jennifer, what about wasn't there also, when we looked through the Department of Labor, when we were working, there was some survey or study, something.
We have the industry codes, what is considered a creative job, but it's very broad in some ways. It goes everything from like a technical grant writer to, a chef. So, but in terms of what would be various roles that you might be hiring an artist for, within these grants, that's an important question, because within your project budget, right, 80% needs to go to hire artists. And that could be broadly interpreted in terms of any, videographer, photographer, graphic designer. Those are arts careers. It's not limited to fine artists or sort of the traditional visual and performing artists, but creative and culture bearers. So we need to think, the list there in your PDF for the guidelines is intended to be quite broad in terms of the roles that people might take in and that is in the guidelines. Actually, I can refer you back to that one as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that question. Yeah. And so we're going to move on now. Okay, so this is where when you're hiring folks, usually when you're talking about hiring a full-time person, it's considered an FTE, full-time equivalent. But what you want to do is you have to start thinking about a full-time equivalent is a person that works 2,080 hours a year. That's what the traditional, what it's based on, the salary is based on. So what you really want to think about is think about all the tasks and time that is allocated for each of the tasks. I'm sorry, think about all the time that is allocated for each of the tasks that a person may be doing. So Jennifer mentioned prep time. There's all sorts of things that go into a job. That's how you have to start really thinking about if you need to hire a full-time person, a part-time person, a contract person. I agree, staying away from stipends, but you have to start thinking about how much time it's going to take. And sometimes what I do is I actually have to write it down. I do a lot of work in healthcare and social services. So I'm thinking like a caseworker, how much time it takes, how much time they're going to spend with each client, how much time it's going to take for documenting, how much time it's going to take for following up and phone calls. And then I have to figure out if we need a full-time person, a quarter-time person, a half-time person, but I have to actually really think about all the things that these folks are going to do. On to the next slide, because we're going to talk a little bit about what funders don't like to pay for. Number one, funders don't like to pay for administration. They know that it's necessary, but they like to pay for direct services, things that you're doing with your target population. They like they like you to pay people appropriate salaries and benefits. They don't like for you to, they like to pay for positions and not individual people. So just understand that when you're budgeting for someone, if you have somebody who's worked for you for years and has just continues to increase in salary, but yet not necessarily in job responsibilities, you're hiring, if they leave, you're hiring for that position, not the person. So I always call it like the Aunt Sally hire. So you have someone who's been around with you for a long time and just, you'd hate to ever lose them. They go away. All of a sudden you're like, well, you're making $75,000, but I can bring a person in that's probably more appropriate for $45,000 a year. So just, again, you always budget for a position, not a person, if that makes sense. Okay, now we're going to talk about partial positions. This is where, if you are math averse, if you don't freak out, because I've given you a little chart here that will help you. So as I said before, when you're talking about a full-time person is 2,080 hours. That's what they consider a full-time person. There, you can budget for a partial person. Well, I know that sounds weird, but you can budget for a half-time person, a quarter-time person, even less than that. And these are some folks that oftentimes will not be spending full-time on the project, but you need their help to do something. A project manager, perhaps, an analyst, a research assistant, and an executive director, because you may be budgeting for a project in your organization, but the executive director is not needed full-time on that project. The executive director may be providing oversight, may be attending meetings occasionally. So you wouldn't have to budget them in as a full-time person. You just have to think of how many hours per week they would be working on the project, and then you would figure out if what their FTE, their full-time equivalent, would be. Have I lost anyone yet? Is everyone asleep? Okay, and I have a question. Wouldn't project manager be considered admin? Depends. You're going to hear a lot of this. It depends. If a project manager is also doing some of the work in the project, you could have an artist that's a project manager. So it depends on what their role would be. Are they doing some art? Then you would budget them in the artist category. And if they're doing some admin, then they would be considered in the admin category. So it all depends.
Exactly. And this, Heidi, this also relates to the question. That's exactly how I answered that question to Heidi the other day, where it's like, if she is project director, but also an artist who will be working on the project directly as an artist, she would be able to pay herself as an artist, as well as admin, even though it's the same person, and they would just be budgeted differently, right? 80% versus 20. And you would just make sure that's really clear in your budget.
Yep.
I've got a question. Would Creative Corps want to see volunteer FTE in the budget, for instance, if like their organization cannot be paid, but obviously we'll be doing some oversight. If it's in kind and not being paid, I would include that in your narrative, honestly, for this, because your budget doesn't need to include in kind.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Andrea, what do you think?
Yeah, I would put it in the narrative, but I wouldn't put it as a line item in there, because the form, yeah, I wouldn't put it as a line item because it would get too confusing in the form. That's right, but I would put it in the budget narrative piece, saying we anticipate having, 2 volunteers. We have 2 committed volunteers who are going to be doing this and their average rate would be totaling. I mean, you don't have to put in kind dollars, but I would just mention them that you have volunteers that are committed to the project.
Yeah. And then what's the difference between an executive director, project manager, if there's only one project?
Hopefully there won't be only one project. Hopefully you'll have more than that. I would say, this is where some smaller nonprofits have one staff member. So you could call them executive director, project manager, admin assistant, everything else. I would put them in then as executive director, Unless, and Jennifer, see what you think about this, unless this is like a one-time project. If you don't anticipate going beyond that, unless you are entitled, unless you are called an executive director. If your title's an executive director, use it.
I would say that if it's a project that's not an official organization, I would consider yourself the project director until you decide to incorporate as a LLC, become the CEO, or if it's a nonprofit executive director. But like T, for yours, you're the project director because you are in charge of everything. Unless you decide to eventually sort of incorporate and become, have multiple people a part of it.
Very good. I'm just looking to see if there's anybody else. Got it. Perfect. Okay. We're going to move on. So now what I've given you is a handy dandy cheat sheet. So this is basically the hours versus the hours. Well, actually, let me move my little bar here. This is the hours per week, this totaling the hours per year equaling FTE. So if you look here, say, you want a person to work, a person's going to need to work. Whoa, sorry about that. Whoa. Say a person, you want them to work 10 hours a week. Well, then that'll give you a 0.25 FTE. So you can do the math, or you can just use a cheat sheet, whatever you want to do. There you go. And I can send this to you electronically as well, but here it is. You can, it's pretty basic math, but I thought I'd give you a cheat sheet to help you out with that. Okay. You're welcome, Cindy. It's funny, when I did this for somebody, all of a sudden I got like 3 or 4 emails. Can you send me the cheat sheet? I'm like, okay, you can do math too, but this is okay. It works. All right. So now, all right. Important note, as we've mentioned, and we're going to mention again and again and again, 80% of the budget has to go to personnel for artists, creatives, culture bearers. That is said throughout, and you have to do that. Which when I started playing with the budget, that's hard. It's hard because there are admin costs out there that you should be accounting for. So just know that 80%, but I'm giving you a budget which has it all formulated out for you. And I thought I'd throw in the kind of artistic curve to kind of go with the group here. At least it's Microsoft artistic. Okay. Anybody have any questions? We've been covering them, but does anybody have any questions at all?
I have a question. Just to ask it, but so the last slide had a category that was like creatives, right? And so I founded something that functions like a nonprofit at the University of Redlands. I'm the founder, but it operates very slowly over time without really an executive director. The context of these projects will culminate in what I consider a creative project all of its own, right? Some of the some funding might come to me as administrative, but also I think a lot of what I do is facilitating this larger what I consider creative product, right? So could some of those tasks be considered part of this larger creative product?
Oof.
By which I'll be hiring artists to participate? Does that make sense?
Here's what, if your role is hiring people, hiring artists, creative folks, the hiring of, and Jennifer, please listen critically, the hiring of the people is administrative. Because
that preclude me from participating as a contributor to a culminating creative product?
No, that does not preclude you from also contributing as an artistic creator, but the portion of your time that's strictly administrative needs to be paid separately out of the 20%, but you could also pay yourself out of the 80% if that work was artistic in nature.
Does that make sense? Are you at your a standalone do you have a 501c3 or is it out of U of R?
Out of U of R.
Okay, just curious. That was just me thinking. Okay, does that make sense? So you have to really think about your role. Like, what are you doing on this project? You may be doing administrative and some of the artistic work. Then you just have to parse yourself out and have a part of you be the admin and a part of you be the artistic.
Well, the culminating project, right, is part of the vision that was linked to the founding of, right? And so but then, I'll have to think it through.
Yep. And this is, think it through and just start thinking like, okay, if we're going to separate it, what's admin? What's artistic? Facilitating groups can be artistic, but also facilitating onboarding is administrative. So you just have to think, okay, So that'll be fun to think that out.
I had a question, but I think you just answered it. So I'm hoping to be able to employ program directors. They're not doing like office administration stuff. They're organizing groups to execute programs. Would that be considered admin or artistic?
When I organize groups, it's very admin-like. It's very admin-like until maybe I get to facilitating the groups.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
So I guess my question is that don't find ways to pay the individual artists. Don't not overinflate. That's not the right word, but don't look at this grant as a way to pay for program directors. Look at this grant as a way to pay individual artists. Am I understanding that right? Great.
Well, and I'm shaking my head, but Jennifer, I want to make sure. Here's the thing. Jenny Kane is the one who knows this grant better than I do. That's the way I would look at it, but I just am a grant, budget grant person.
I've been thinking about this, like, how do we make this like super simple to think about, right? And so 80% has to go to pay people to make art or be directly involved in the making of the art. Personnel related to admin is not part of that 80%, but anything else has to be for people. It cannot be used for supplies, or even if that's part of the artistic production. That's 20%. 20% is everything else.
Well, I would say, but similar to the question that was just asked, someone that is producing is generally considered creative. If you're producing the program, in other words, you're having to organize all of the parts to make the program happen. Isn't that part of the 80?
I would beg to differ. I think a producer is just like an executive director but for performing arts.
Yeah, that's not how we used to consider it at SASIS, but okay.
I think that might be on an individual basis. If you're, it needs to be involved. Yeah, let me ask that question, and I'll look it up, because it's a little bit more nuanced, but it needs to be. Yeah.
The reason just quickly, the reason that I'm asking this is if you're an agency like ours, that, we have to hire an overall producer because we're all volunteers. So that would create, and that producer generally has got, sure, there's some admin activities, but if you've got a program director, or producer that's having to do the actual work, they're generally doing the hands-on organizing of of all of the creative stuff. It's a creative role, but yeah, please ask and let me know. Okay. Anyway, I'll go. I don't want to take up too much time.
That's a good point. I also see, though, like sending out emails, creating schedules is not necessarily, that's admin in my mind. But when you're working with people to if you're doing some kind of play or something like that, I'm going to stay out of that answer, because I'm here to talk about budgeting, and there you go. That's a Jenny Kane question to ask the the funders there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good nuanced question around, like, particularly for performing arts, the producer, what category would they be considered? So I'll go look that up.
It's a good one.
A teaching artist is definitely considered an artist and a creative. Yes.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next one. All right. So now we're talking about, sorry about that. All right. this is, that block was not supposed to be there. So this is basically budgeting for operations. Okay. So now we've already talked about people. So we've talked about partial FTEs. We've talked about paying them appropriately. We've talked about finding out where you can get like salary information. We've talked about people. We've talked about the importance of that. Now we're going to get into operations, which is the other stuff. This is more of the admin stuff. So we're talking supplies, we're talking equipment, other, which would be maybe subbing out some of the job, facility, all those things are operations. So other things for operations would be travel, consultants, supportive services, equipment, supplies. Now here's one other thing I want to tell you is I'm giving you budget information. The budgeting process for Creative Core is a little different than the budgeting process for other grants. So if you're considering pursuing other grants, this is all really valuable information that you will find that all other funders will ask for. Creative Core is being very kind in their request for budgeting information. So just know that, so if this seems too complex, it is a bit more complex than the Creative Core budget, but it'll be useful information because hopefully you're going to go after other grants in the future. Just wanted to give that little asterisk, that little preface. Okay, another thing, facility lease and rental. If you have a facility, that's also part of operations. Okay, back to this. How many times have we said it here? Okay, 80% has to go to the people, the artists. No more than 20% can be spent on operating costs or admin. We said it again. All right. Okay. So now we're going to get into something that's funky. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because Creative Core, and Jenny, please make sure I'm right, Creative Core will allow you to take an indirect percentage. Will they allow you to take 10%?
You can do whatever you want with your 20%.
Okay. So here's the thing. Indirect costs are things that you're not going to put in a line item for in your budget. Indirect costs are things that you won't necessarily be paying for out of the grant, but you need to pay for to operate your organization. Things such as electricity, water, like I talked about. Sometimes, audit, bookkeeping, financial, legal support, custodial, maintenance, those types of things, landscaping. So it's all those things that you need to pay for, but you're not going to ask the grant to pay for. So it's kind of, and people say, so it's like a slush fund. No, it's not a slush fund because these are actual costs. These are things that have to be paid for, but you don't put a little line item in a budget for them. So there's something called, you know what? I'm not even going to go into this unless if you are going after a federal grant, then you need to pay attention because then there's something called a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement that eventually you're going to want to know about because let me see if I do have the slide about, yeah, I do. Okay. Because some organizations have very large indirect, federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreements, NICRAs, NICRA. And it's because, and they can ask for this percentage on top of every dollar. This is valuable stuff because this can go to things like paying grant writers, paying your paycheck people. But this is only after you're going after very large federal grants. What you are going to want to think about is what's called the de minimis, the minimum, which is generally it's 10%. So I don't think that if you're able to, now keep in mind, this is going to go into your admin percentage. So you may not be able to have, this may send you over the top for the 20%. But if you want to ask for 10% de minimis indirect, what the total budget is of your grant, you can ask for 10% of that, but it's going to come out of the admin. But then that can be used for whatever you choose it to be used for. Just want to throw that out there. The indirect cost is really important. A lot of people, a lot of organizations don't take advantage of it, but it is, you're going to spend money on it anyway. It's not like these are, this is a slush fund. But if you look here, like
And
some,
like consider that for if you're applying as an individual, and sorry to interrupt,
Yeah, go
Andrea,
ahead.
but like what would an indirect cost be for an individual? Since we don't think about indirect costs, but like, the cost of maintaining your studio space, or I don't know, would you consider mileage? Where that could be its own.
it could be its own. So this is where you have to sit there and think, okay, am I gonna be asking for like $60? Well, no. If you're gonna be driving, if you're gonna be driving from, say, for instance, Barstow to San Bernardino, that adds up fast. So you may want to line item that. But if you're going to be driving from San Bernardino to Colton, to San Bernardino to Rialto, that could be part of indirect. But you don't have to identify what the indirect is. That's the thing about it. It's just 10% indirect. Then you use it for whatever you want to use it for. Yep. But when you get into bigger grants, this is where it is very beneficial. Okay, don't worry about that. Here we go. Matching, we don't need to worry about that, which is in kind. Don't need to worry about that. When you get to other grants, you should consider that. Here's again, suggestions for matching, but you don't need to worry about it. Okay. We're at a point now where what I want to do is pull up the budget to show you some budget samples that I've sent to you, so you'll know how to use them. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to stop sharing and pull up. And while I'm pulling up screen, does anybody have any questions? You could unmute yourself and chat if you'd like. Create Core draft. Okay.
I do want to lift up Frank Markowitz had a great question, which was, could some Creative Core grant awards be less than the requested amount? In other words, is this funding all or nothing? And actually, that's a great question. It is not all or nothing. So our goal is to give away all the money. And so in looking at equity across the geography, across the art disciplines, across the communities that want to be served, there may be some adjustments. And so you may get an email. It's like, hey, we want to fund you. Would you be willing to adjust your budget here this way or this way? So that was something that came up in the planning process.
And I also want to suggest, I noticed that there was the larger category said 150 to 250. Was that it? I think the range was 150 to 250, somewhere around there.
It was up to 150,000 if you're an organization.
That's right. If you have a project and you're an organization and it's a good project and you only need to ask for like 80,000, no reason to fluff the budget. I would say ask for the 80,000. Am I correct, Jen?
Yeah, be as specific as you can, because then it shows how well you are connected to what your real costs are, because then it'll show that you actually have the ability to implement it, right? If your budget looks super simple and you're like, okay, artistic director, $50,000, graphic designer, $10,000, indirect costs, $10,000, and it has no detail. It doesn't even list out what your hourly rate is for people. It's going to show to the review panel that you really don't know what you're talking about. Right. So it's telling a story, right? Like you said, like your budget is a version of your narrative through numbers.
So up here, you see now, this is essentially a spreadsheet that the Creative Core budget in the application is using. And what I did I put it into a spreadsheet for you. Okay. So, but I'm going to go a little bit more into detail so you can start really thinking out what are the expenses. I'm going to give you a better spreadsheet. So this one, I am in blue italics. That's for you to cut out. Those are just my notes. So under this, you'll see that it says Creative Core budget. It says the line item category. So you would then put personnel or artist lead or whatever the title is. Then what you have to do is you have to put some detail into it, like what either the FTE percentage is, how many hours per week, at what cost. You have to give them detail. Then you can then put over in the total here. And let's say I didn't do the math here, but let's say it's $25,000. Okay. And you'll see here, I put a formula, so it will then total everything up for you. Okay. So just know that the way I separated it though, and you can do it, I separated it. You don't have to do it this way, but I'd recommend you do it this way because it works with the spreadsheet. Is I would recommend that you put in, and what you're using this sheet for is to then transfer the information onto the actual application. This is in the same format, but you have a spreadsheet for you to use that will total it up for you. So I would, if I were you, put it in where you'd have the personnel, the 80% category up at the top. Then you'd have the 20% category down at the bottom. So again, let's say you put supplies. Let's say you put a detail, details of what the supplies, detailed supplies you need. And then you'd put, say, $5,000. So then you have, again, it totals it out for you. This isn't the fun one though. This isn't the fun one. This is something that I'm just giving you so you don't have to worry about totaling it. There you go. So you have that in your packet. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and now go to the fun one, which I had fun making. And here's the thing, guys. I never thought I was a math person until I learned how to use Excel. And now I love math. I think in terms of everything in math, I just love math. Okay, so what I did was, let me show you. You have this in your inbox. So this you can use for any budget from now into eternity. Save it as a master. Again, don't mess with the formulas. So this gives you now, this is the creative personnel. So you then can use the little cheat sheet, or you can start thinking about how much you want to pay them per hour, then how many hours a week you want them to use a cheat sheet. So that'll give you the FTE, however you want to do it. But you'd put in however many, whatever the percentage of full-time equivalent it is. So this one would be a half-time person. You can go ahead and put in the salary. If you know what the salary is, then that will give you a subtotal. It will automatically do it for you. So let's say you want to pay, say, their salary is going to be $75,000. It goes ahead and totals it for you. If you are paying benefits, you can put in your benefits percentage. If you're not, you can put 0. It'll give you how much the subtotal is of the benefits and then how much the total is that you would be asking for that person. Let me explain this little hourly and annual. So let's say that the person you want to pay for the artist, you want to pay $75 an hour. So you put in $75. Then what it'll over here in the formula, it will tell you what their annual salary is. So then all you'd have to do is put in their annual salary here. So if you want to pay a person $75 an hour, you could put in the 156 right here. Then that will tell you how much you'd have to pay them if you want to pay them, for instance, and you want to pay them benefits. Say you have a person 75, they're actually going to end up costing you $102,000. So this is all formulated out for you. I suggest that you save it as a master and play with it. Okay. Then we get into, and let me show you the joy of this is, let me show you down at the bottom. What I did was I also separated it so basically automatically it will then tell you the percentage of creatives versus admin. So let's go through admin. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to bring on a queer culture bearer, and you wanted them to be a 0.10, which would be 4 hours a week. Then you wanted to pay them $100 an hour. So then that would total out at $208,000 a year right here. Then you'd have 10% of that is $20,800. So the total would be $20,800. So it's all formulated out for you. So then you get into personnel. Now what I did here, or I'm sorry, not personnel, operating or admin time. This is where I put in an executive director at 0.05, which is 2 hours a week, what their annual salary would be, what the subtotal, and all you have to do is change it. Say your executive director, you're paying them $65,000 a year. Then it formulas everything out for you. Now, then we also have other operating, because I wanted to have operating admin personnel. So these are folks that are people that are going to be working on the project, but are doing strictly administrative. Then I also put in operating other expenses. So this would be if you wanted to put in office supplies, a cell phone, artist supplies, things like that would go in here. And again, this is all, they're all formulated out for you. So then we have the totals. I also put in an indirect percentage. Let's say you don't want to take indirect, you could put 0 there. Put 0. And then everything comes down to here and it tells you right then and there what your percentage of creative folks, artists, as compared to admin. This is for you. It's a gift.
I just want to say that when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, you just like that. It is such a gift to be able to see that and to have it broken down by creative, the top portion and how you listed it. So
I love doing it too. It was fun to do. They should use this actually in the budget next year. They should, or whenever you do this again, they should just use this.
Yeah. I just want to lift up that people had a question about, okay, are the benefits included in the 80%? And I was like, yes, that is what you are paying your creatives. So that, and it's not an indirect cost. It is something that is part of their salary that you are paying them. You are individuals paying yourself. You should include that. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for lifting that up in this.
Very good question. And the other thing too is if it wasn't, it would really mess up my spreadsheet. So I'm glad that's the answer. I'd have to completely.
No, it's great.
Oh, I was stressing out. Yeah. So you should, but everything, I went through and checked everything. So everything should work. Again, save it as a master. If you do have any questions on this, Janie will give you my contact information. Please feel free to shoot me an email on this. But it is, and Jenny, am I doing office hours for some?
Oh yeah, we need to select the day, but we have folks in this. I will let you know. I'll email all of you which day Andrea will be joining me for office hours. The next 3 weeks, every day of the week except for Mondays, there are office hours from noon to 1:30 with one of the 4 organizations helping to do outreach and support. And I will make it, all of those dates are listed in the grant guidelines. I'll make sure to put that in the chat again.
And so I can help you during those office hours as well.
Heidi had a question about part-timers being paid through 1099s or through payroll.
Got it. That's so you're talking contractors.
Yeah, that's
1099 is contractors.
Do you feel comfortable answering that question?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would put them. Well, it depends. Again, it depends upon their role. And sure, you would put if they're an artist, you can 1099 them, of course. If they're contractor, this is the way I would answer it. If I'm wrong, Jenny, slap me. But I would say if they're contractor artist, you're probably going to have a lot of I would think, independent contractors as artists. And so I would still put them now. Again, this budget is strictly for the creative core. You know what? I will send you another budget that's more generic for other, where it doesn't break it down by creative versus admin. I'll send out another budget template, Jenny, to you to send out that you can use for other programs. But under this budget for the creative core, I would then put them under the creative personnel if they're an artist. And then you would just take away, you wouldn't have benefits. And I would put a note here, like here I did with the Quia Culture Bear, I would put under contract.
Right.
Now in the real world, not creative core world, there's a whole separate category for contractors, and that's under operating costs. So it's a little different. Like in the real world, under personnel, you would only list your personnel that you are hiring by your organization. Any contractors would go under essentially under operating costs.
Yeah,
it's a little different in the real world.
And I want to say that neither Andrea or I are experts in AB5 law. So if you are worried at all about whether this person you are hiring does not pass the AB5 test, meaning does this person contribute to the mission of my organization? Do they do this work for other organizations? There's a whole list of things that you need to make sure. if you're hiring them for work that is core part of your mission and as part of your ongoing programming, you may need to look into hiring them as an artist and putting them on payroll.
Yep.
And I would encourage you to do that. A portion of that would be included. The payroll taxes that you would pay would also be considered part of the pay.
Yep. And that would all go
Yeah.
under, usually when
Uh,
you do things like that, that goes under benefits.
Yeah, so sorry, AB5, for those of you who are unfamiliar with AB5, that is basically an independent contractor law that was signed into effect, I believe it was 3 years ago, maybe more, in which it really asked people to reconsider what is someone who is a contract worker and what is someone who is core part of my staff, who should be considered personnel and receiving benefits. And it does require more smaller organizations and nonprofits to hire people as a part of their staff, pay payroll taxes, and also provide social benefits, right? Not just contract workers definitely have been historically left out of social safety nets. So that was the reasoning behind it, but it does end up adding more costs for small nonprofits and smaller businesses. So just to be aware that that does exist. If this is new for you, there's a lot of resources on the internet. I would look up AB5 and being a nonprofit in the arts, and there's a lot of great webinars about it.
Yep. And and thank you for bringing that up, Jennifer. Be very careful because there are severe implications if you are hiring someone as an independent contractor and they should be an employee under the law. It can get really serious really fast. And T said, I recall you said no stipends. So if you're doing oral histories, would your informants, the people you interview, be storytellers or cultural bearers?
That's a really good question. Audience participants, because they're part of the production.
You know, that's maybe there is a place for stipends. I don't know. I mean,
that may be T. I'm gonna look into that one and I'll get back to you. It may be that would be considered 20% because they're not really, well, it depends on the role they're taking, right? So if they're being interviewed and you want to give them offer them something for their time, it depends on what they're being interviewed about. Maybe they're part of the creative process. I know, that's why I'm leaning towards yes.
yeah.
So it would just be like, what would their title be? Yeah.
And storyteller was one that was a suggestion, possibly cultural contributor.
There you go. I like that. A cultural contributor, project contributor, community project contributor. Come up with a title that works for your project, but yes, they would be considered creative personnel because they're part of the process of making the art.
Love it. Love it. And Angela had her hand up. Angela Lloyd.
I was asking, the material that you gather from the interview, will that become part of a performance down the road, or how is that involved in the project that you're doing? How does it inform the project?
Are you asking us or?
Yeah, I'm asking that. I'm just in terms of the name you would give them is the gathering of their story.
It's going to go into a podcast, a book, and a play. So it would be gathered. So they are contributors. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's I like that. I like community cultural contributor because it's alliteration, number one. And it also involves the community, which I like. That's good. Good. Yes.
There is a fellow in Orange County. Is that considered one of these where we are? It's not.
No.
Okay.
Yep.
He asked me to work on a storytelling festival with him, and I haven't done it, but is that something that I could I make doing that work with him part of my project? No. If I was to be like the artistic director and gather the other storytellers, they wouldn't be coming from my They wouldn't come from Victorville. They'd be coming from national.
I can't quite hear you, Angela. Also, could you maybe
It's
come
probably
closer to the
way down.
computer?
I think it's way down. It's all the way down.
Here we go. We got you now, Angela. There you
So if the event was going to happen in Orange County, then that wouldn't work for this. I live in Victorville. Yeah, so my time as an artistic director for that event would not work. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
And also a great point that everyone that you are hiring through this program or stipending through this program does need to be live, work, be embedded in either San Bernardino or Riverside County.
Okay, and we had a good question here on 32% for benefit rate. If that is, if that's what you should budget. No, but yes, but no. Quite often my answers are maybe. So benefits, depending upon when you're talking medical, depends on who you go with for medical. There's all sorts of other workman's comp and things like that. So you really have to, this is a number that I have seen used frequently, but I've also seen 41% used by other organizations. So it all, if there's a retirement, all those types of things. So you'd probably have to do some research and go to an insurance broker or someone that sells insurance to find out what, or benefits, excuse me, a benefits broker, what the benefit rate is. 32% is probably okay to budget. But I can't guarantee if you're a person who has chronic health conditions and things like that, it's going to be much higher because they usually give you an idea, but then when you actually get into it and they start doing some analysis, it can vary. So there you go. But for budgeting purposes, 32% is probably fine. It's not going to raise red flags. It's fine. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this so that you have that as a gift. Let me go back to the PowerPoint because I want to talk about budget narratives now, because in the application, it asks you to do a budget and it asks you to describe. Let me, are you? No, you're not. I don't think you are. Hold please. Share screen. Here we go. All right. So let me make it move the bar. Here we go. Okay. So budget narratives, and again, this budget narrative is the standard budget narrative. The budget narrative Creative Core is using is a lot smaller. It's very simple, but you should still cover the same information in your budget narrative. You should talk about the amount of time the person is going to be spending for personnel, or the artists, the amount of time the artist is going to be spending, what they're going to be doing, why is it important to the project, how it supports the project overall. Again, and it's not a lot, just a sentence here and there. If there is fringe benefit rate, then you should mention the amount of fringe benefit rate, and then the total requested per position. So you would have, for each position, you would have the title of the position, 3 or 4 sentences describing, again, how much time, why is it important, what are they going to be doing, and then you can mention the fringe benefit rate as well. Then you move on to the next position and the next position. And let's see here. All right.
I'm just giving people a translation. Like, let's say they're budgeting for themselves as an individual artist project that they don't really have full-time staff. So they are the staff. So they would translate that sort of as the hours they're going to spend on the project.
Perfect. Excellent. So for so that's personnel. You just list each person, you put above it, and I would not put personnel. I would put artists, whatever the title they use in the guidance, use that as the title. Then you would move on to the next category, which would be in the, it would be administration in the application. And then you would put in, again, and I would put it, if you're asking for travel costs, I would put that in there. Explain the travel costs, how many miles you anticipate driving. I would use the federal mileage rate which is, I think it's 66.5 cents per mile now. You have to look it up. You have to look up federal mileage rate and it will tell you. And then just put how many miles at that cost, what the total is, and then just go through. If you have equipment, what equipment you'd be requesting, supplies, just go through, write how many of them, what the cost is, what the total cost is, why it is important to the project. And just go through that, and you put your admin, put the total admin request. And then I would go on to indirect. You'd put in, if you want to ask for indirect, the 10%. You don't need to worry about match, and that's it. The budget narrative is more for a person who is, it's for a person who is not necessarily a math person. It's for a person to look at it and to see how these positions, how these asks fit into the big project. So it's for a lay person to read and go, oh, I get it. So you're okay. So this is what you're going to be doing. So it's just looking, it's writing in text what your budget is reflecting. That's what it is. But again, it's important for them to understand that for them to think that you have done your homework, that you have a grasp of what it's going to take for this project to be implemented. Make sense? Okay, on to the next one, which is, oh, Q&A. We've been handling Q&A. Do we have any other questions out there?
Haven't seen any, but I just want to reiterate to folks that you do not need to match this funding. That was just for other things that, Andrea does this for a lot of other things as well, which always require matches, it seems like. So this is fairly rare. You do not need to match this funding.
This is good. This is good stuff. Okay, organizational budgets. One thing that this application does require you to submit an organizational budget. So let's just do a little look here. How many of you have an organizational budget? If you do, put your hands up. I'm just going to scroll through. Yay, we got some. We got a lot of still pictures. So I don't know. Here we go. I see some. All right. A lot of you don't, though. Okay, thank you, Merch. Those that do, good job. Those that don't panic. All right. I'm going to give you a sample organizational budget, which will help you then work your way through an organizational budget. Let me tell you what an organizational budget does. So an organizational budget is different than a program budget or a project budget because this looks at the organization overall. So it looks at how you're bringing money in and then how you're expending it. So there's a difference with a project budget. You're just telling them how you're going to spend it. With an organizational budget, you have to say, okay, this is how we're bringing the money in. This is what we're bringing in. This is how we're bringing it in. This is how much we're bringing it in. So, and an organizational budget is looking at what you anticipate bringing in and how you anticipate spending it. I've given you a template for that, but I will show you. Okay, and let me just give you some tips. So when you're doing an organizational budget, start today. Start throwing information into the spreadsheet. Just start thinking things out. Also, for your own good, note any assumptions. So this is assuming, say you're applying for other grants. This is assuming that you'll get, say 50% of the grants you apply for. So just note assumptions or note some of your thoughts, because a year from now, you may forget, like, why did I come up with this number? I would recommend underestimating income because you never want to overestimate income and then spend through in money you don't have. Also list volunteer hours at fair market rate. Put that in the revenue. And if you have any expenses relating to the volunteers, you would put them in expenses as well. Ooh, we have a good question, which I'll get to, Jean, in a second. And then also always try to put some away into a rainy day fund where because your ultimate goal is to have 4 to 6 months of operating expense if things happen like government shutdowns and things like that, where if you're heavily reliant upon government funding. So let me go ahead. Okay, so we have a question from Cindy on a city committee. We have one, let's see here. We have, let me see, oh, wow. Okay, that's great. Okay. Cindy, I do not know how to answer that when it comes to city committees. I am sure that there is, I actually would not guarantee that there is budget for each city department.
Yeah, but we're not a department. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to talk to Jennifer about it at some
Yeah.
other point or somebody.
You can make up, just you created a committee budget if you have one.
Yeah, we have a committee budget.
that's
It's
fine.
just gonna be odd, not like a 501c3.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then Jean's question, you would just, you would use your own organizational budget, not this fiscal sponsors.
Yep.
Even though the legal applicant for you is your fiscal sponsor.
Awesome. Okay. And on to the next one. So I'm giving you a template that looks like this, that is also an Excel spreadsheet that is templated out. But this is basically what you're looking at for an organizational budget. So you would look at how you're bringing in your money, what different categories you're bringing them in for. And then it tells you your total cash revenue, total in kind. This is where you put in any of your volunteer hours. Then it moves into expenses. So ideally, if you're a nonprofit, you have some for the rainy day fund, but they somewhat come close. You can't make a huge profit. In other words, that's the term. You can have a profit, but then it goes into the rainy day fund. So it's not necessarily profit in nonprofits. That makes sense. I will show you right now. I'm going to stop sharing.
While you do that, I want to just pay attention, folks. In the chat, I listed a Dropbox, what we do not fund PDF, which is from the California Arts Council. We are required because we are redistributing state funds to adhere to this. So make sure that anything you list in the 20% doesn't fall into this category, which one of them is food. So you cannot technically buy people Starbucks with this grant money. Sorry, that's what comes to mind because everyone wants to buy coffee. And technically you cannot purchase equipment, but you can rent equipment.
Yeah, that's good. So,
So those are the two that would sort of come in. The other ones, are not applicable in a lot of ways.
So this is what the budget looks like that I'm giving you. So you can then just plug things in. If you have a current organization budget and say you anticipate bringing in foundation funding of 35, say you brought in 35,000 and and then your current year to date actual is say 25,000. And then the previous budget, then oh geez, what happened? So everything auto populates. So this is a standard template for an organizational budget. There are variations, but this is one that you can use if you don't have an operating budget. So this should work for you. Expenses, you would plug in your salaries. You can go ahead and separate them out, or you could just put totals. And we're having issues with the Dropbox link.
Yep, it's also linked in the guidelines that everybody has and is downloading off the website. So I can put the link to the guidelines in the chat.
And so you're getting this also. So feel free to use it or not use it. But if you don't have one, this will work for it. And let's see here. I think I'm getting close, folks. Starting to lose my PowerPoint. So let's see here. All right, let me go ahead and share this.
Again, if anyone has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. No problem.
All right, go to the next one. Again, use your tools. I'm giving you all sorts of stuff. I will send you a regular budget, a non-Creative Core project budget template, so you can use that for any future grants. And that's it for me, folks. So let's ask some questions. Let's talk about any questions you have on budgets, any questions you have on anything in general.
A workaround for equipment is listed as a supply. And don't be specific.
And equipment, the definition for equipment is anything over $5,000 and there's a certain shelf life.
Yeah, it's meant to be like we're not buying huge technology pieces for organizations. Yeah.
Things like that. No, and that's honestly, you should run it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah,
Andrea,
exactly. So like even a camera, right, for a project would be a supply. it is that even though it really, listed as a supply just to be safe, purchasing for a graphic artist, yeah, that would be supplies.
Hmm.
Unless you're talking about like purchasing the entire, like, the things that put down the screen printers and just listed as a supply.
How about a printer, like a new printer? That would,
Is it under $5,000?
yes, supply.
Supply.
Yeah.
Yep. They're considering, in the good old days, they weren't. Computers were equipment, everything. And now they're realizing that these are all consumables.
Uh-huh.
Sad, but true, as we all know.
Mhm.
I saw a question, yeah, projector. Yep. Those would be supplies as well. Other questions?
Oh, will this PowerPoint be available after this, as well as those other worksheets? I think I sent them everything that you sent me this morning, but I think a few things we could pull out and send again.
Yeah, I'll send, I'll send the cheat sheet in like a little Excel, and I'll also send the standardized budget, which you don't use for Creative Core, you use for any other projects that you want. What else? I think that's all I owe you. I think I will definitely get that out to you. Other questions?
There was a logo at the bottom of your PowerPoint. Is that a logo for your business?
That's me. That's me. Yeah. I do,
What is your business?
I do a lot. I've got a few things. I do grant writing. So I do a lot of grant writing for some big places. I'm very fortunate. I get to choose my clients. I've been doing it for a long time. I brought in a lot of money,
Mhm.
and I like my job. Strange. I like government grants. I know I'm weird. I'm totally weird. Like big government grants. I like those. But I also am a director at a Cal State Reentry Initiative, which is a parolee reentry project that I started a long time ago, and I'm staying with them because they can't kick me out.
Mhm.
And but largely grant writing and stuff like that. I love it. It's fun. It's I get to work from home. I get to hike when I want to.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah, I live up in Oak Hill, so I live close to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Just down
good.
the pack.
Right. Yeah, I basically live where there's red on the freeway every day nowadays.
Yeah.
So I also want to ask you folks now, if you could put in the chat now, after going through this, and I can go back to A being non-existent, like I have no knowledge, I'm fearful of it. E being I'm an expert at it. Could you tell me where you are now in the budgeting process? I'd just like to see if people have slid backwards. If you could put that in, I'd appreciate it. And then I want to ask a D+. Yay, Cindy. I like that. I like that. Thank you, Faye.
Oh, what does non-expandable mean? Maryam, you asked non-expandable mean. I'm not sure what that is referring to.
Where is she?
It was in one of the budgets. Okay. Paint versus a paintbrush. Rhonda, what's that mean? Oh, expendable. Thank you.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, and both would be supplies, I would say.
Yeah. Perfect. And then you only need to submit an organizational budget if you're an organization, not if you're an individual artist or a collective.
And I have one other question I'd like for you to put in the chat. How many of you are pursuing other types of grant funding? If you are, just put, the name of your organization and yes, because I just like to and Jennifer, I know, gets information out on other grants. But I saw some interesting groups and different, I saw some health related things. And so I'd like to know more about, I keep an eye out on grants all the time. I mean, I'm constantly looking, especially interesting. Especially if you have anything dealing with health at all, social determinants of health, any of those things. I keep an eye on those things all the time. I want to learn more about these people, Jennifer. So I can keep
Well,
an eye out for grants.
why don't we plan a follow-up for hey, other types of grants and how to apply for them, and we could do
Yeah.
another workshop with you if folks would like that.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is kind of interesting stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, this would be great.
Oh, great. Thank you for listing all the organizations too, because for us, we want to know, and if you need help identifying an artist for your project, you don't have to have them identified for the project in advance, which is rare, but we did know this is a condensed timeline. But if you want help identifying some artists or finding them, please put yes in the chat, and I will make sure to follow up with you with an email, because we have started a roster of professional artists where we have resumes, we have people listing what they are interested in working alongside other organizations to do, and we'd like to try to start making some connections for folks. Okay, Faye, I will make sure to put down, and Ismailia, I'll send you an email, and that way you can fill out. We have a very short survey about what types of artists you'd like to connect with, and then we'll go from there.
Love it. I'm going to save the chat too, Jennifer. So
Okay.
I'll send that to you.
Yeah.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to give you back 5 minutes of your day, unless Jennifer's going to take it, and she might. But does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, go look at the Eastside Art House in Riverside. They have good artists. We'll stick around and answer some questions, and we'll follow up and send you the resources. If you have feedback about anything, please send it to me or Andrea. Do you want to share your email with folks who are interested in contacting you?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat. It
Okay.
should be on the PowerPoint, but it's, oops.
Thank you so much, everybody. And we'll, yeah, for those of you who put your information in the chat about needing to connect with other artists, I will make sure to email you. Right now, I just have Faye and Ismailia who want me to email them. Okay.
I look forward to hearing about all the wonderful things you're going to do with this money, because San Bernardino, and also thank you for what you're doing in San Bernardino County. You know, we when I talk about when I do needs
And Riverside
and Riverside too. Sorry,
not me, but other people here are from Riverside.
Yes, you Riverside people. Sorry. But when I write about, because I also do writing in Riverside County for groups out there, but when I write about the needs, you know, it's so interesting, especially I live up in the high desert, and you can tell so much about the health of a community by their arts presence. And, you know, Jennifer and I have had discussions about this, and it's, you know, when you start looking at communities that have been revitalized and are just vibrant, you think about San Antonio, you think about all these places that are just, you know, arts, meccas, and we need that here. We need that here. So we need that in the IE for us to be looked upon as a wonderful place to live, because it is. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate you. Uh-oh, we have a hand up. Angela.
I have 6 lines from Rumi. I've said before that every craftsman searches for what is not there to practice his craft. A builder looks for the rotten hole where the roof caved in. A water carrier picks up the empty pot. A carpenter stops at the house. Carpenters stop at the house with no door. Workers rush towards some hint of emptiness, which they then start to fill. Their hope, though, is for emptiness. So don't think you must avoid it. It contains what you need.
Very nice. Thank you, Angela. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thank you. So thank you for all you do. I know exactly, totally. Thank you for all you do. I look forward to maybe if you need help during office hours, we'll get that going. And if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. And when you shoot me an email, tell me a little bit more about your organization or where I can find it, so I can keep an eye out for grant funding for you as well. Okay.
Wow, thank you. Wow. I will tell you that this Andrea does do that. She's always sending me, hey, apply for this. So if you get on her list, or be prepared for inundation.
Watch out.
All right. We have all y'all's emails from signing up through Zoom. So if you got this link, it does mean that we have your email because you needed to give it to us to register. Don't forget that there are office hours and 2 more workshops next week. We have one that if you are new to working with artists, either as a city agency or organization, there is a special session just for you. I highly recommend you attend that one. That is on Tuesday. There's one on Thursday for accessibility considerations and tips. And we'll be talking about resources, how to use Zoom, and how do you hire a translator, and how do you set that up, and different considerations if you're going to do virtual and in-person workshops. And that'll be very conversational with a lot of resources. And then office hours are free. It's every day, like I said, Tuesday through Friday. Different folks are hosting those, and all of the registration links are in the guidelines, which I put into the chat again.
Yay, keep doing good work.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And then the recordings will be available. Once they're available, we will email everybody. And then we're also waiting to have this translated into ASL. So that will be available on the website as well as the Spanish and on the YouTube channel, but it'll just take a little bit of time to get that up and running, but it will be available.
Right.
So, yeah, thanks you all. Thank you again. Feel free to email us if you have questions afterwards. All right. Be well. I think someone wanted to stay after and chat with me, so I'm going to stay on for a minute and stop the recording.
All right. And I'm going to say goodbye.